Hey, what's up? Welcome to another episode of Wassup Conversations, a podcast with icons of pop culture. I'm your host, Hamid Reza Nikufar, and today I have a mega talented writer as my guest. She is the writer of Guild Wars 2, Murdered Soul Suspect, Dishonored, Death of the Outsider, Control, the upcoming Fable, and Avatar, Frontiers of Pandora. My amazing guest is the one and only Anna Megill. Anna has published a new book about writing and the game industry called The Game Writing Guide. Get your dream job and keep it. This book not only gives you a great insight into writing for AAA and indie games, but it's a great career advisory for the people of the industry. In this episode, we talked about Anna's success story, narrative in video games, her experience with people like Sam Lake, Harvey Smith, and many more. Before we begin, please consider subscribing to Wassup Conversations if you're enjoying this show. Wassup Conversations is available on YouTube and all the major podcast and streaming services. Thank you very much. Let's go. Hello and welcome to Wassup Conversations, Anna. It's so nice to have you on the podcast. Congratulations on your amazing new book, The Game Writing Guide. Get your dream job and keep it. And I was surprised by it. I thought it was only about writing, but this is such a complete and essential book for anyone working in the industry. It has something for everyone. It's a huge achievement. Again, congratulations.
Thank you very much, and thanks for buying it and reading it. I really appreciate that. There was a real need for exactly this kind of book. Like, there are a lot of books out there about game writing already, and I'm like, do I really have anything new to say that's not really being said in one way or another somewhere else? And I thought, no, not really. But what I was seeing as a hiring manager at various companies was people just not knowing how to sell themselves, not knowing how to access jobs, not knowing how to apply, and then starting a job as a new writer and just floundering, not knowing how to navigate a studio and life there. And I thought, I really want to help these people who don't have access to a mentor and don't have access to the opportunities I was lucky enough to have in my life. So let's give them a leg up and write a little book. And so I did. And I talked to some really smart people who also had some great advice. And so hopefully people who read the book will be able to, I think one reviewer said it was like getting a free year of working at a studio, like it's that level of experience, and that was the goal. So I'm delighted that it's finding its way into the right hands.
Yeah, so many of them are books about writing for video games are kind of like feel like someone's written this outside in the studio. Like there's a freelancer writer that writes and just hand it over, and there's no perspective about how actually the games are made and how, more importantly, the modern video games are made regarding their story. So this was completely different. All right, this is inside this studio, not only about how about writing, but about hierarchy of the positions that we hear, or and so like a lore designer, narrative director, or what are these? So and it explains it all. So
idea guy.
Idea guy. Yeah, blessed by God.
Lucky guy.
Yeah. So I usually start by talking about the success story of my guests to inspire others with the journey they've had in life. So please tell me about the time you decided to write for games, and how did you approach to get your first gig?
Okay. So the weird thing is I wrote about this in the book, so now I feel like I'm quoting someone else, but it's just me. I'm quoting me. So I used to be a bartender, and as a bartender, I played video games in my spare time. This was way back when, in like the early noughties, like right around the turn of the millennium. I'm old. And so I was just playing games on my own and thinking about, do I want to be a bartender forever? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe I don't want to still be a bartender when I turn 50 years from now. And I was playing a video game, and I remember the moment distinctly. Like, I was playing it and the dialogue was just cringy bad, like so terribly bad, just awkward and stiff and over-explanatory, and just really terrible that even to my untrained eye, I'm like, this is painful. And like a little light bulb went off in my head, and I thought, I could write better dialogue than this. I bet I could. And that's where the idea was born. but I didn't know even how to go about it. Back then, game writing isn't what it is now. Like now you can just go on social media and find like 50 game writers who are working in all aspects of the industry. But back then, like they just didn't exist, or if they did exist, I didn't know where to find them.
And when was it? What year was it?
It had to be like around 2003, I would say.
Wow. So the
2002?
medium wasn't this big about the story.
No, it wasn't. I mean, I'm sure that they existed, but I think they were like designer writers back then, right? So you would have your designer who would also write some text for it. Certainly not what we're seeing now with games like The Last of Us or God of War that are almost like crossovers from cinema. Just didn't really exist in the same way. And so I kind of put that on the back burner and I thought, okay, I'll figure it out. And then when I was ready to leave bartending a few years later, and I'm like, okay, let's get serious about this dream. How do I go about doing this? I didn't know. Like there were a couple of dedicated schools for game design, places like Full Sail or DigiPen or places like that. But I didn't really see any game writing trajectories there. And so I thought, well, I'll just go back to a normal school and see what happens. And so I went to a very traditional liberal arts college in New England. And my very first day in town, I met the QA manager who was hiring testers for Playboy the Mansion at the only game studio in town. And I got introduced to him and he said, hey, you should come test our game. And I'm like, yes. And that's how my career was born. And that was a traditional way you did it back then. Like you started in QA and then you sort of learned about all the different aspects of the game, decided which path you liked, and then sort of worked your way toward a position on that team. And I'm really glad that I had that sort of holistic view of how a game is made. Because I see a lot of writers now who come in as successful writers from other media, and they don't know the first thing about how the sausage is made. They know how to tell a story. They know what's a good character, how to write, dialogue that sings, but they don't understand the limitations of our medium. And they sometimes hit a wall. They're like, but I want to tell this story. And I'm like, you literally cannot tell that story in this medium. It's just not possible with the narrative systems we have in the game. So I feel like it's given me a leg up in understanding how games work.
Yeah. So I think what's important is that kind of like expose yourself in a way that you make connection. And by making those connections, you get to show your talent. And people are just sitting in the house and like, I'm a great writer, so why doesn't anyone appreciate that?
You're right. I skipped over like probably the crucial part of that story, which is I got to meet that QA manager because I had been putting it out there to all of my friends that I wanted to be a game writer. And I had a work ready to show. I was interested in games. I learned how to talk about games intelligently. I learned to talk about game writing. And so when that moment came, when lightning struck and I had that opportunity, I was ready to go. And I was able to jump right in and step into that role. And there's a lot of work that went into leading to that particular moment, going back to school, making the right connections, educating myself, putting myself in a place where lightning could strike. So a lot of that is the hard work that people have to do, but it's also luck, right? It's also just pure dumb luck that he happened to be on his way to hire testers at the moment that I met him. Like that's the stuff you can't control. But you do want to sort of get in line everything that you can.
Yeah, but you created the possibility of that to happen and also being prepared for it. And what's great about and reading your book and knowing you, I kind of I get this feeling that you are realistic, looking at things realistically. I mean, there's this. I'm butchering this, but you said something. For first time you played that game, you said something like, "Okay, I can write less crap than this." It wasn't like, "Oh, I'm gonna write a Oscar-winning screenplay for a game."
Yeah,
but you were kind of realistic, and step by step, you got through it.
Yeah, the bar was very low. It seemed, I'm like, someone got paid to write this terrible dialogue. I could write something that terrible too,
Yeah.
you know? So that's attainable, right? And I think that's how you have to think of it, not comparing yourself to game of the year, the most stellar writing that's winning all the awards, because you're probably not there yet. And not every writer can do that every time. But comparing yourself to sort of like, okay, could I write some of these barks that I see in the background of games? You probably could, and that's a good place to start in an attainable goal, I think, for people who are interested in getting in.
Yeah. So I believe there is this misunderstanding that many people think they can write, but there's a huge difference between making up stories in your head and actually writing them at a level that is compelling to read. So, how do you think someone could assure that they're a good story writer and not just overconfident about their regular imaginations?
The things I have seen that people have sent to me as writing
Oh,
samples, it is sometimes very clear to me that they've never shown it to anyone else, and
yeah.
that like the first time someone else got eyes on it was when they sent it to Lucky Me, and you look at this and you're like, there's some raw talent here, but you need so much work on this. Why didn't you have someone at least correct your spelling? Why didn't you have someone correct your grammar? Like they could at least have polished it slightly. um, so the advice I give in my book is to get other eyes on it, to workshop it with other people, to get it out there so that you can start getting feedback, because feedback is the key to improvement, right? It's going to sound great when you're reading it to yourself in your room and you're like, this is the best thing anyone has ever written. But then the moment you get it out there and it's confronting people who weren't inside your head to understand everything, you're going to suddenly realize, oh, I didn't explain that very well, or now I see that you could interpret it that way. That's not good. And you can start finessing it and learning how to adjust it so that it does speak to people the way that you want it to. um, one of the biggest mistakes that I'm seeing now, we have a lot of people coming over from other media. A lot of TV and film writers are suddenly very interested in writing for video games, which is great. But sometimes I just posted something on Blue Sky today. Someone just got a message from a writer who was like, hire me and I'll fix all the terrible writing that you see in video games. And it's like, ouch, you're saying that to people who do this for a living. Not all video game writing is bad. So if it is bad, can you explain what that means? There's a certain attitude that some people bring with them, that writing for games is somehow lesser writing. And I would say that those people probably don't understand the constraints of our medium, and that's what they're revealing when they say that. However, most people are really lovely. They sincerely want to move into another medium. They're interested in it. They see the challenges and they're like, hey, that looks cool. So those people, yeah, I mean, they're already professional writers. They already know how to do what they need to know how to do to tell a story. So their challenge, I think, is learning what is different about games and interactive writing, that's different from telling a story for film or for TV, because that's usually where their knowledge is missing.
Yeah. And also, I think many times they're just comparing this to movies, which is a huge mistake.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I don't get my storytelling satisfaction from video games that often these days.
No.
I play a lot of games and I watch a lot of movies, but what I get in movies is so much better story-wise. And I think many times game developers underestimate the craft of writing games, and they think they all can come up with ideas, which most of the times are bad rip-offs of movies. And probably movie people come into the medium and try to write. But the good news is that we're seeing more and more narrative directors and specialists and different persons taking care of the stories in the game. People like you who are helping this evolution. Do you agree with me that the most of the games are lazy in their stories and characters, especially characters? They're mostly plot driven, and plots itself is gameplay system driven. And we desperately need someone like you to just say, all right, I know what the medium is. This is a video game. We need to have this gameplay going on. But also we need to tell a great story. So this marriage happens by people like you, which again we see more, and the result is much better than like 10 years ago, probably.
I can't agree that most video game writing is crap. I can't do that. We have a saying that every game is a miracle. Because the compromises and the cuts and the adjustments you have to make to your perfect platonic ideal of the story before it actually gets to become something that people can pick up and play. It's such a long process, you know, and preserving any kind of story across a development cycle. Like nowadays, like the average AAA game is 5 to 7 years, right? I mean, that's a really long time in which things can go horribly, horribly wrong, as they say at Remedy. So I think any game that releases with an intelligible story, I'm like, kudos to you. Congratulations. You got it over the finish line. I think that what we see a lot are playable movies, though, right? And because it's such a direct comparison to what you're seeing in the cinema, it is going to fall short because there are constraints on it that you don't have. A friend of mine who made the move from film to video games said he was really surprised by how educational game writing had to be. Like, you're not just telling them the story, you're also telling them what they need to do next, where they need to go, how they need to do the next thing. Like, you're really having to direct them through a space, as well as entertaining them with the story. And it's very hard to do that elegantly. I also think we really haven't taken advantage of the mechanics of games to do things that film cannot. Like, our medium can do things that other media simply cannot do. And I think two games that do it really well, I talk about Brothers in my book, where it's this absolute fusion, this synthesis of character and story and mechanics and structure, and it all comes together in this crescendo of emotion, and you feel a physical loss for, spoiler, the death of your brother, in a way that I don't think any other game has pulled off. And a movie could not do that, could not give you that feeling of absence the way the game does it. But I was also playing Tetris Effect the other day. Have you played that?
No, unfortunately not.
It's a game where it's Tetris. I don't know what else to say. It's Tetris. But the more you play, like, the more these effects go off, and there's music that accompanies it. And it's more about a feeling. And because the gameplay is so sort of methodical and fast, it turns off a part of your brain and sort of frees you to go on this sort of transcendent journey that's created by the music and the gameplay. And that's, I think, something that games do particularly well. There's no dialogue in it. There's no characters. I mean, not really. There's some dolphins. There's, you know, some butterflies and stuff like that, but no actual characters. No one speaks. But it is a transcendent feeling. And I come out of that game feeling like I've meditated for, you know, an hour or something. It's really peaceful and calming and hypnotic in a way. And it does tell a story. There is a journey that you go through as you're going through this game. The lyrics of the songs tell a story. But I mean, it can take up to, if you play the way I do, it can take up to, like, you know, an hour to go through the whole cycle of it. And it's a real experience. And I think it's an experience that I don't see cinema providing. So that's what I wish people would lean into more, the things that games can do and other media can't.
Exactly. Yeah. As you've mentioned, it's, I think it's at the best of what it's about the experience rather than just sitting, because we are interacting with the story and the game.
Yeah.
And some examples about not games with no dialogues or anything. This is Inside from Play Dead. It's
amazing.
It's a game that not only is just a great experience, but when it was done, I was just thinking about the whole thing. What was the meaning of anything? It goes beyond any movie that I see. Or for example, Hellblade, the first Hellblade that I played, it was just metaphor after metaphor. It's just an experience that I personally thought, am I experiencing this like this, or anyone else playing the game is feeling like this? Another example is that you were involved with was Control, which again was just something that you don't see anywhere else. Not in games or just movies. It was just a beast of its own. So, as someone who was the narrative lead of Control, which tells a complex story with so few words, how do you manage that? How do you tell stories in games without using so many words and cutscenes?
So I mean, that's absolutely possible. Like, think about Journey, right?
Yeah.
It told a very classic story, like the classic story, without a single line of dialogue. And the only real speaking in the game is just like these little chirps of symbols. But it was the first game that ever made me cry, right? So you obviously don't need dialogue to pull that off. I think something that most people don't realize is that for a AAA game that can be 40 hours long, you're given a budget of cinematic time, and that can be something like 15 minutes of cinematics for a huge 40 to 80-hour game, right? So when you're given this budget as a game writer, you have to figure out how you're going to spend that, right? And in Control, we had a very small budget. We had a very tight schedule. And so Sam had the brilliant idea of these leitmotifs, these sort of repetitive images that we could sort of repurpose. And we turn that into a strength rather than a weakness. So you're seeing these repetitive motions of people pointing a gun, you're seeing these images repeated. And they work in that way as symbols and as archetypes and add to the meaning rather than, having to just go through a plot development. And it allows people to put their own interpretation on it. I think it definitely, the stylization of it helped a lot to make the most of the few minutes that we were given. And we also had to get really clever and find other ways of telling the story. And that's sort of what it does sometimes. Like, we have a lot of live action footage in there. We have the Dr. Darling videos. We have, the director, you're seeing inside of his head. That's all live action, just an overlay on the screen. We have a puppet show, so we had to get really creative and find ways to deliver story information that wasn't just, okay, now we're going to have a big action cutscene where a spaceship, crashes into the earth or whatever, right? And I think that gave it a literary quality that people really responded to, because those are leitmotifs like that. Symbology is the kind of thing that you normally see in literature.
Yeah, perfectly executed. So, what do you feel? What do you think about cutscenes these days in video games?
What do I think about them? Cry, cry, cry. I think they take a lot of work to get right. I think that there is a trend now toward these very highly cinematic games. I think that there's an aspirational goal at some studios to make the segue from gameplay to cinematic and back so seamless that you're not sure what you're in. And I think that's really cool. If you're going for full immersion, that's absolutely the way to do it. And there are a lot of games that I really like that do that. But I also like games that have, as we've discussed, almost no cinematics at all. And I think as long as what's happening in this cinematic is justified, and as a game writer, I'm pretty critical of what that is. I'm thinking, you wasted 30 seconds of your precious cinematics budget on that. So, if it's not really an emotional character moment where you need a close-up of the facial mocap so you can really get inside the emotion. If it's not a big epic scene that there's really no other way you could show except, in this cinematic, then, doesn't need to be one. Or unless it's doing what we did with Control, where we're giving you these repeated images that sort of add up to something more over time. Then yeah, I have seen a few where I've questioned why it was a cinematic.
Yeah. So how critical are you when you're playing a game?
Too critical.
Is it hard? Yeah.
It's hard to shut your brain off, right? Because that's what you do professionally. So what I try to do is play a game through once, just to play through and enjoy it and let the experience wash over me, and try to have the experience that the people who made the game intended. And I really just shut off my inner critic and enjoy it. But then if it's a game that I liked, I'll go through and I'll play it again, and that's when the analysis switches on. And like, I've played Hades. I think probably I've escaped from hell over 1,000 times. And I'm obsessed with it. I'm obsessed with the dialogue buckets in that game. Like, how deep do they go? How many different reactions? How does it know? I'm just really fascinated with it. And every time I play it, I notice something new about it. So I think that comes with its own enjoyment, because when it's done really well, and it's done really well in Hades, like, as a game writer, knowing how hard it is to pull that off, it's delightful to see this like virtuoso performance. It's exciting.
Yeah, great. So you've collaborated with many great writers in the industry. How is the collaborative writing work? How do you start your day? How do you solve creative differences?
So we have a big Thunderdome, and then you put a writer on either side. No, I'm just kidding. So you have to
fight for it.
Yeah, you've heard the phrase, "The pen is mightier than the sword," but little did you know. So there aren't usually that many that can't be resolved. Like, usually the only times that there are struggles is when a writer has invested a lot in a character or in telling a character's story, and it has to be cut or altered or changed in some way that feels personal to them, and they feel it changes the integrity of who that character is and the story that they're trying to tell. And those are the moments when, you have to sit down and sort of talk about the greater project. And can you take some of what they were trying to do here and move it somewhere else? But at the end of the day, we are all making a game. We are all sort of at the whims of the needs of the project. And so there are going to be those moments. And I think more often than not, writers support each other through that, and be like, "Oh, your character got cut. That's a bummer. Yeah, I'm really sorry. Yeah, they cut mine too." And you commiserate. I think when there's a real difference in vision for what something's supposed to be, which does happen sometimes, I'm not exaggerating, you go into a room and you workshop it. So you just say, "Okay, here's the problem. This is your solution. This is my solution. Let's walk through it step by step, beat by story beat, and see how that would play out using each of our versions." And usually you can find a compromise, or one person will be like, "Okay, you're right. Now that I look at the logic, it doesn't make sense." And it's pretty simple. As long as you have respect for each other as creators, it's not that hard. I can't honestly think of a serious creative difference I've had in a really long time. Yeah.
Do you find it more creative or easy to write along with other people?
I do. Writing these books by myself was one of the worst experiences of my life. There's no one to hide behind or blame, right? Like, "Oh, why did she write that? Oh, wait, that was me." I like collaborating. I think that games are magical. I think that when you get a bunch of really smart, really creative people together in a room, and they're all bringing different experiences with them, and you throw all of that together, like, magic happens, right? There's just this incredible sizzle, like when you realize that, someone has taken your idea and they've one-upped it, right? And they've made it better. And then you're like, "Oh my gosh, but then we could do this." And so everyone's going back and forth, and the idea that was fine already just keeps getting better and better and better. And that's impossible to do on your own, right? You have to bounce it off of other people and turn it around and examine it. And there's no other feeling like it. Like, there's fire in a writer's room. It's just really dynamic and exciting to be in there when the ideas are flowing.
But is it as personal as it could be if you write it solo?
Probably not. but you can still write a character that's personal or a
Yeah.
character
Oh yeah.
story that is personal as part of a greater story. I think most of the stories that I've written for games are fairly epic, right? They're
Yeah.
these big stories with a cast of, dozens of characters. They all have their own trajectories that basically come together at a certain place. And you can own that character and put bits and pieces of you in there. But yeah, if it's just your story, it's probably not going to fit in with what other people are writing, and it has to. It
Yeah.
all has to cohere. But writers reveal themselves all the time through the
Yeah.
stuff that they're writing. This isn't really my story, but I'll tell it. There was a writer on a project who was going through a really nasty divorce, and it showed in his
Wow.
writing. Like
Wow.
he was writing all these scenes where a guy was just being like brutally put down by a bunch of female
Wow.
NPCs, and like scene after scene after scene, and it was just like, buddy, I think you have some things you probably need to work out.
Or
Why
don't,
don't you,
because
yeah, why don't you go sort that out and then come back when you're feeling a little better, because you're kind of stuck in this rut here.
Oh, yeah.
And that happens. When I was really burned out at one point, the first thing that went was my writing. That I've learned to recognize that as the canary in the coal mine for me, that I'm starting to feel burned out, because I write from my gut a lot of the time. This feels right. This,
Yeah.
I can sense that this feels good, and that sort of vanishes because I'm so tired or burned out or just creatively not in a good place. And so I'm writing purely intellectually at that point, with my knowledge and education rather than my gut, and it shows in my work. It doesn't have heart, and it becomes pretty cold and
Yeah.
intellectual, and it's a good sign that I probably need to step back and take a break. So yeah.
Yeah, and I guess you can learn a lot from other writers or collaborators or creative people. You've worked with
Yeah.
one of my favorite writers in the video game industry, and that's Sam Lake. How was the experience of working with him?
Sam is amazing. He's a true visionary.
Yeah.
Like Control, when I first saw it, it was called P7, and it was just a pitch deck.
Yeah.
It was just a PowerPoint presentation with some images and Sam up there going, but no, you have to see it. And it was so compelling. Like I saw his vision so clearly that I'm like, nope, I'm going to go work on that game if it kills me. So yeah, he's really brilliant, and I have a lot of respect for him, and I learned a lot working with him. So I really have nothing but respect. I don't know if you've made it through the book all the way to the end yet, but Sam contributed a quote that I felt really sort of summed up what I was trying to say with the book. So yeah.
Yeah,
nothing but respect. Yeah.
And how many people were working on that game, Control, on the writer team?
On the writing team, when it started off, it was just me and Sam for a while, with Evi Korhonen, who was our narrative designer, or what you would call now a narrative features designer. And then I hired in Clay Murphy, Ben Jelena, Sinica.
Wow.
And I think that was it. That was our team. Yeah. Wow. So not a lot. But small team.
What was the biggest team that you were collaborating in writing?
Probably Guild Wars 2, because that was an MMO.
Wow.
We just had a huge team for that. Yeah. Though I didn't know at Massive, working on the Avatar project, we had a pretty big team there too, across several studios. So yeah.
Oh yeah. So your book is about getting a job and keeping it. What's great about the book is that there's a chapter about leaving your current job, which I think is as difficult as getting one. And a lot of times they're tangled together. So psychologically looking at it, how could someone see that their decision is for their development, or they're just a quitter?
Yeah, I don't like the word quitter. It makes me sad. I advise people throughout my book to check in with themselves and remember why they got into games and what it is that they're there to do, right? Because I think you can get really seduced by things like a fancy title or, oh, they're going to pay me a lot of money to go work at that studio. And you can end up in a job that you don't really like very much or isn't fulfilling to you. Or some people just sort of get trapped there, like the golden handcuffs, right?
Yeah.
And they get very divorced from the whole reason they got into games and to do the things that they love. And so I think if you're checking in with yourself and saying, am I happy? Am I fulfilled? Is this doing what I want to be doing out of life? Then that's your litmus test. And if you're like, nah, not really, then it's okay to go look around and see what else is out there. You know, you could be perfectly happy working on a project, but then your dream project is just next door and you will never know unless you go and talk to them. And you could go from happy to like incredibly fulfilled overnight. So there's no harm looking. Looking isn't leaving. Talking isn't taking. I say these things all the time just to encourage people to go out there and see what else is out there and meet people and talk to cool professionals who are working on exciting things, which, you know, I think the networking part of it is really exciting for me too. But if you're in a job and you're like, I'm not excited by what I'm doing, or gosh, I look over at this other person and they're doing work that I wish I could be doing, then, you know, you don't always have to leave, right? You can go talk to your own studio and say, hey, maybe I could move over into this other department, or maybe I could try this other thing. And a lot of people have done that and ended up just switching disciplines and became really happy. Like moving from animation to writing, for example, or, you know, from writing to cinematics, like those transitions happen a lot. But sometimes it's just not right, you know, and you're doing a job and you're not excited about the project and you don't get excited about going into work and you're just sort of going paycheck to paycheck and you're starting to get a little bit numb to it all. Those are the moments when I would really encourage people to just at least pull out of it enough to go see what else is out there. Maybe you're not going to leave, but at least you know you gave it a shot. You know, you've examined the situation that you're in. Maybe you're burned out and you don't know it because you can never tell when that's happening. So, yeah, I don't think it's quitting to be curious about what else you could be doing. That's growth, right?
Yeah, there's good advice in the book that's saying that before leaving a job, consider that, have something in mind, have some opportunity. I guess that creates two great points. First, that all right, maybe this other job gives you makes you brave enough to leave your comfort zone here. Like, oh yeah, there's something good here. No worries, I can just leave and work there. Or in another way, you just see other jobs and you're like, for the first time, you kind of like, oh my God, my current job is amazing. Those are just crazy. I'm doing my dream job. I just didn't know about it. So that's a great advice. So, and I mean, mentally and financially by the end of the day.
Because I mean, you can leverage another offer into getting, you know, something that you want at your current job too. If you're doing good work and you're a valued member of the team, the company is probably going to try to hang on to you and probably try to, you know, maybe they can't entirely match the offer, but they can improve your situation. So, I think the main thing is to just question where you are periodically, at least once a year, sit down and say, hey, am I happy? And then, you know, see what else is out there and go from there. And there's no harm in doing that at all. And it's not, I don't think it's being a quitter at all. It's looking out for yourself. Yeah.
Great. So let's talk about your favorites. So what are some of your favorite games narrative-wise?
I saw this question and I was just like, I never know how to answer this.
Never gets easy. Yeah.
So I talked a little bit about Hades, and I am obsessed with it. Really excited for Hades too, and I don't know. And I've talked about Brothers, which I think has nailed the magic formula. You brought up Inside, which is another one. Inside and Journey that have told stories without a single word, and I think just really, stripping everything away like that and just making it so clean and simple and pure, and expressing the story through gameplay. I really love that. But a game that I don't think people bring up enough is Whatever Happened to Edith Finch. I don't know if you've
Yeah, I
played
played
that.
that game. Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, the cannery episode is one that everyone talks about because it's so moving. But there's also the one where the ship is out in the harbor or in the bay, and you see it out there, and it's just this stranded ship, and there's all these legends built up about it. And then there's that one where you're walking through the mist out to the boat.
Yeah.
That was one of my favorites too, just because it was so unexpected and just so. I had no idea what was happening or what was going to happen. And I loved that feeling of just being lost and floating in that mist and just moving from moment to moment out to the out to sea, essentially. It was lovely. And I think about that game a lot. It's goals, right?
Yeah.
I played as a cat. I was a cat in a tree, jumping from branch to branch. It was pretty cool.
What was the last game you played that inspired you?
The last game I played was literally Hades, like 20 minutes ago. So the last game I played that really inspired me, I'm trying to think. I don't know. I mean, I've been playing a lot of stuff for work. So, I was really, all right, so I'll talk about it a little bit. And I think I can safely talk about this without endangering my NDA. But I replayed the original Fable games recently, for obvious reasons, because I was working on Fable. Yeah. And I played those games when I first started out as a game dev, and they were goals for me back then. It was the first game I played where I'm like, oh, okay, I'm a game developer now, and I know what's going on underneath the hood. But there was still a lot of stuff that I didn't know how to do, and replaying the games recently and feeling how far I've come and how far the industry has come with storytelling, sort of the bookends on this 20 years of my life, was really exciting. And I think it inspired me just seeing, how far we've come and how far we have yet to go. It was cool. And I think that's all I can really safely say. Just getting to notice, I think, in a really personal way, how much storytelling has evolved and yet still sort of stayed the same over time.
Yeah, exactly. I know what you're talking about. So what game you can't wait to play that is upcoming?
Hades 2, obviously. Haunted Chocolatier. Haunted Chocolatier is the one. I check periodically to see if it's out yet. I'm just dying for it. I've wasted thousands of hours of my life on Stardew Valley, and I'm pretty sure I will throw away just as many, and not throw away. I will spend just as many on Haunted Chocolatier. But I'm really excited. Eric Barone just puts so much love into his games. They're so personal. They're so delightful and wholesome and fun. And I'm really excited to see what he's been doing with ghosts. It's very cool. Yeah.
So I'm curious. What do you think about the storytelling in RPG games, since they are not linear as other games and player can have their input and change the whole thing? And they're so gameplay based, gameplay heavy. So it's not just a narrative driven game. So what do you think about that? Do you have freedom there writing for those games?
So I would say the RPGs really have the illusion of choice more than they have actual choice, right? Because you can't really do anything that we haven't mapped out great for you. It does. I mean, you're playing it your way as your character, and that's the whole point of it. So I I find them really challenging. I find open world games where you have no idea in what order a player has done something or what knowledge they have when they're coming to a particular scene, very challenging. And you have to sort of write in a modular way where, okay, if you get this information at this point, then you can attach it to this other bit of modular information and this other bit of modular information, string that information together like a string of pearls. And then when you have the complete necklace, we can move you on to the next level. But I think there has to be a certain amount of linearity. Like, I think I mentioned this in my book, that completely open games where you could do things in any order whatsoever, if it exists, I don't know about it. There has to be a sense of progression. There has to be a sense of build, I think, in order to pay things off dramatically, at least. There has to be a certain element of linearity there. So,
yeah, an amazing game that I played and had the privilege of having the writer on the podcast as well was Disco Elysium, which was insane. It was like nothing I ever seen. So yeah, it can go there too. Yeah. So So what are some of your favorite movies? I hope Hades have a Hades movie.
Yeah. Am I really pegging Hades that much? I probably am. I am really obsessed with it. So I'm no good at these lists. I'm trying to do a top 10 list for a media outlet right now, top 10 games, and I don't know. How do you choose? But some stories that I really love in film. Everything, Everywhere, All at Once.
Yeah.
What I love about that is it starts off being what you think is your normal, come with me if you want to live science fiction story. And then it just veers off into this wild, weird joy. And it just becomes so wholesome and heartwarming. And it was completely unexpected. Like, I went in there not knowing anything about it. And I came out, I was like crying during the rock scene. I just felt like I was on this roller coaster ride of just happiness and wonder. And I absolutely love that film, like me and the rest of the world. The Spider-Verse films are incredible. I have never been a huge Spider-Man fan, I have to confess, but those films are amazing, amazing. The first one in particular, just the elegance of the storytelling in there. You care about these characters. You care about their relationships. It's really wrenching. No spoilers. The death is really wrenching, and it's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So it is goals for me to be able to tell a story that simply and that elegantly and with such style. I think they really set the bar pretty high. I think it's one of the best films I've seen in the past 10 years, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Last night I watched Across the Spider-Verse for the second time. Amazing. I've never been a Spider-Man fan, so that's the crazy of it. So,
right, same here. Yeah.
The other thing that you mentioned something about death, and it's something that I was thinking some weeks ago, that the idea of death in superhero movies has become so like valueless, kind of like it's not impactful as always. What do you think about having an impactful and good death in a story? Please don't revive people.
I would argue that there are still impactful deaths in superhero stories. I think people were upset about Tony Stark, for example, in the Avengers films. But again, going back to Brothers, the death in Brothers, where the first thing that you do when you've lost your brother from the controls and you're staggering around trying to figure out how to use them again is you have to bury your brother. It's this visceral, awful, terrible act. You have to do it. It makes sense. It was such a bold move for the designers to make, because it could have just been ludicrous.
Yeah.
You're dragging his body around. Like, that's something, you pick up bodies and throw them into dumpsters all the time to hide them in video games, right? And it's meaningless. It might as well be garbage. But when it's your brother, and you know that when you drag his body over and you put it in that grave and you cover it with dirt, that is it. He is gone. And you're so clumsily doing it because he's not there to help you, and you're just missing him. That kind of moment, that kind of death, that makes an entire game.
Yeah.
And it should be transformative. So I think if you're not feeling anything when a character dies, whether in a movie or in a video game, something has gone wrong.
Yeah.
Players haven't been able to establish a relationship with that character in a way that matters. Because if they're gone and they're like, sad, sucks, guess he's not here anymore. I'll just loot him and take his stuff with me. I mean, I think if you're at that point, the writer has probably failed to do what they, I am sure, wanted to do, make you care about that. And, and it may not be their fault. There might have been banter. There might have been scenes. There might have been a cinematic moment that ended up getting cut. You don't know what went wrong. I always wonder. I like looking at things that fail. Like we talk about films that I love. A film I'm obsessed with that isn't amazing is The Fall. I don't know if you've seen that. The Tarsum Singh, he directed it.
No. Unfortunately,
right. It's okay. I don't think a lot of people have. Yeah. It's a beautiful, beautiful film, and I am fascinated by it because everything's there. Like, all of the ingredients for a successful story are there, but it just doesn't work. It falls flat, and I've watched it so many times, going, where exactly does it fail? Yeah. What did they not do right to make this not work? Because the acting is great. Lee Pace is the stuntman in it. He does an amazing job. That all the relationships and the characters, it's all there. It just doesn't work. Fascinated by it. So yeah.
Yeah, and I'm a music composer, and there was this project that I worked on, and the director was like, all right, this is the death scene of this very important character, and we need to make it emotional. And I was seeing, like, man, it's not working on the paper. What do you expect me to do? To pump it up, to just make this the saddest thing ever? But it's not working. It's like you just before even writing it, you just decide this guy's gonna die here, and it's gonna be impactful. So I don't care anymore. And we talked about Brothers. I had Joseph Ferris on the podcast, and we talked about that game. Yeah, and a lot of that Brothers coming from his own personal life, escaping Lebanon and escaping war with his brother, and they're so attached, and the idea of family in a Middle Eastern country. So when you talk to this guy and you play that game, you see, oh my God, this is even more personal than I thought. So yeah, it's
amazing.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Actually, that's really cool. I will say that moment with the death and what they pulled off with the mechanics of the game elevated it. And I think that's the moment that when you have to swim at the end, the two payoffs for the mechanics, because it's a fairly traditional fairy tale up until that point, right? It's got all the archetypes. And I was playing through the game most of the way, and I'm like, this is a pretty game. Oh, it's a pretty little fairy tale. But then I hit that moment, I'm like, oh no, wait a minute. Now I get it. That's really cool. I think it's amazing when writers are able to tell their stories through a story that has nothing to do with theirs, because like, at least on the surface, right?
Yeah. We talked about death, and I want to mention one of your great works on Dishonored, Death of an Outsider. So do you ever like to write another Dishonored game?
I would. I've talked about, like, what I would love to do is the continent of Pandacia that's only ever mentioned in notes
Yeah.
and stuff. It just sounds
Wow.
wild.
Yeah.
Whatever's going on there is just wild. And I would love to write something that had to do with Pandacia in the Dishonored universe. So yeah, hey, Arcane.
Yeah.
Look me up. That was a really fun world to write in. I worked with such an incredibly
Harvey
talented
Smith.
team.
I love that
Harvey
guy.
Smith, Sashka Duvall, Hazel Monforton, who's now on Bungie. I mean, everyone on it was just so incredibly talented. And they're so smart. What I love about the Dishonored games is they're very political underneath the surface, right? Like they're obviously political, right? But then there's another level underneath there that's even darker and more scathingly political. And I think it's rare that you find games that can pull that off, right? It's usually pretty simple, black and white, good or bad choices. BioShock Infinite, are you going to pelt this couple with rotten cabbage or a baseball or whatever it was or not? It's pretty black and white, right? And I think sometimes the choices in Dishonored are not that easy to make. So yeah.
Great. So this is it. Thank you so much, Anna, for your time. Your book is a very important work, and anyone interested in working in the game industry could benefit from it. It clarifies many vague perceptions people have about writing for games. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for inviting me. It was a real pleasure to be here today. Thanks.